My recent poll has come back, and it seems 39% of you guys want a video on mass combats. So let's get straight into it, shall we? I'm a huge believer that every good campaign should have a battle. I've tried running battles in a variety of ways over the years, from narrative systems to Matt Colville's Strongholds and Followers warfare rules, which is great for wargamers, but not so great for, well, role players. The rules I use work for both. And before I jump into this, I just want to make you guys aware that my rules are in no way necessarily unique, or nor were they originally created by me. I actually took the idea from Professor Dungeon Master of Dungeon Craft, who did a video on mass combats a couple of years ago, and all I've done, however, is expand the rule set and make the idea my own over the last year or so. Before we can even consider actually running a mass combat for our players, we need to consider the scale and which army actually has priority. Priority can be determined by 4 different factors: morale, strategy, quality, and quantity. Morale is the confidence of the troops, as well as the discipline of them too. Strategy is all about the situation in which this battle will take place. Has one side ambushed the other? Does one side hold the hill? Is it a siege where the defender has large stone walls and archer towers? Quality is obviously the value of the troops and their capabilities, whereas quantity is of course the amount of soldiers being fielded by both sides. Once I determine who wins in each category and by how much, I come up with a very simple fraction or percentage that can represent those odds, like a strength bar. This is where the basis of the system kind of comes in. I figure out from 100% how much each side has in terms of advantage. With that considered, all we need to do is assign each army a set of dice based on which side is stronger. If the dwarves are slightly stronger than the elves, perhaps close to 60-40 in favour of the dwarves, I'll give the dwarves 4 dice and I'll give the elves 3 dice. Okay? These dice are d20s and represent all 3 factors that make up the strength of each army. These dice are really important and will determine the eventual winner of the contest. Before every battle, I tell the party what the priority is and how many dice each army has. This is important because it lets the party know what the expectations are and which side is expected to win without their involvement. At the end of the battle, those dice will be rolled. Typically, I allow the players to roll for the army that they are representing, whereas I will roll for the enemy army. The highest dice roll from each army represents their force's result, meaning the more dice you have, well, the better chances you have of winning. As you can imagine, a smaller army with less dice can still win if they roll high enough. Some of you may not like the idea of playing in a system which basically auto-resolves battles and sieges, as you may feel like the party doesn't really have much control. But in a large battle, how much impact is a party really going to have? That is a very big question. This question will be answered using the following rules. Once the dice is determined, the battle starts and the Dungeon Master begins narrating the initial clash of armies. Arrows being fired, men being slain. And it's up to you to prepare a number of encounters for the party to take part in. These encounters are scenarios, and based on the size of the battle, there should be between 1 and 5 of these scenarios. I typically sit around 2 or 3 for a battle under 1,000 combatants, but then I push it up to 4 or 5 for really, really big battles. These scenarios can be just your typical encounters where the party takes on enemy champions, special units, or dozens of grunts, but what I like to do is set up goals for the scenario. This goal could be as simple as capturing a hill and defeating the orc champion, or escorting a lord who has fallen from their horse back to the rear. Sometimes I give my players access to units, such as a group of knights or swordsmen, and I allow them to control the units, have them take actions, etc. This allows players who enjoy wargaming to direct units and have them make an impact, and it allows the role players to focus more on their own personal decisions. I've had a player who at a higher level ended up being a cavalry commander for a lord, and one of the scenarios in a battle was him leading his cavalry and charging them into the archers who were at the rear. I had him roll a leadership check and a horse running check, along with a check for his cavalry, and if I remember correctly, he didn't roll too well. His cavalry was overwhelmed by infantry who were hiding with the archers, and this led to the party charging over, saving his life, and rescuing the remainder of the cavalry before they were wiped out. Usually for each scenario, I set a victory condition and a failure condition. I've already given you guys some examples of victory, but for failure it is typically when half or more of the party fall unconscious. Rather than dying in one of the first encounters, your characters can be dragged away. You don't always have to do this as a dungeon master, and you normally only do it for less dangerous or impactful scenarios. But whereas in boss fights, you know, it's do or die. Earlier I stated that the party can in fact impact the result of the battle. The way they do that is by succeeding at these scenarios. For each scenario that they succeed at, they receive between 1 and 3 points to what we call the hero's advantage. These points at the end of the battle are just added up and just combined with the highest dice for your army. It represents a dice modifier, just like how you would add your attribute score to a skill check or an attack roll. This hero advantage is how I allow players to try and tilt the odds in the favour of them and their allies, but it will only happen if they fight and perform well. As a rule of thumb, I don't normally give my players more than 5 points of hero advantage total, as it skews the combat and gives the party too much control. This is, however, your prerogative, and if you're playing at a high level, or a more high fantasy campaign, you could go up to +8 or +10 total. But decide in advance how many points you are willing to give out in this battle, and assign a couple of these points to each scenario. Simple scenarios can be a +1, whereas a boss fight can be a +2 or a +3. To split up the major scenarios, I also include a number of other events and obstacles to challenge the party. Here are some of the things that I do. Feel free to come up with your own ideas to appropriately represent your combat. If it's naval, perhaps there could be a challenge for firing cannons, or boarding the other army ship or the other navy ship. You are only ever stopped by your own creativity and imagination when it comes to a system like this, but I do hope, however, my examples will help you guys direct things moving forward if you plan to use this system. Here's a rough outline of something I do for my players. And as you can see, I split up the encounters and even offer the party the opportunity to rest after the second encounter. They could choose to take it, but they'll lose one of the points they've gained from their hero advantage. I also give the party leader an opportunity on number 6 to gain a hero point if they can successfully rally the allied army. Feel free to go with the flow and offer the players unique ways of engaging in the battle. If a player has an idea of how they can push forward and use their skills to better the battle, it's fine to allow them to roll a dice and just narrate what happens. Not everything needs to be a battle map or a dramatic speech. Once the encounters and content is finished, you can decide the winner by having, like I said, the dice be rolled for each side. As I said before, the highest dice from each determines the result. You will then add the modifier from the hero advantage to find out what the end result really is. Whilst it's typical for one side to roll higher than the other, it's important to consider the difference in score. If both sides roll close, then it was a Pyrrhic victory, or a close defeat. If the allied army rolled significantly higher than the enemy army, then it was a heroic victory. Here is a simple table to calculate the level of victory based on what the difference is. Once the result has been determined, you can narrate it to your players. I don't try to spend too much time worrying about the specifics of things like casualties. I'm more than happy to handwave and just narratively explain things. If your players are keeping track of things like soldier numbers, you can come up with a percentage of losses for their army based on the result. Also, a stalemate could mean that both armies destroy one another and are left with very little. Or it can mean that the armies took light casualties and both left the field to lick their wounds. The decision on how the fight actually ends is really up to you narratively as the Dungeon Master, and you can use the result to direct the rest of your adventure or the story. Obviously, in other systems, you roll to calculate casualties, and that's all well and good, but I find rolling for that kind of stuff a little bit meticulous for my liking. You can use this system for land battles, sieges, skirmishes, naval combat, whatever you want. My rule of thumb is to only use it in situations where there are more than 50 combatants. The big 5-0. If there are less than 50, I usually make squads and units that players can control. You know, they have a single health pool and a single attack on their turn. So this just keeps it very, very straightforward. So, you guys have obviously seen the system. I hope you guys like it. This has been my illustrious deep dive guide on running a mass combat. I've run several mass combats using this rule set, and whilst my players have not always found victory on the field of battle, they've always left the table feeling pleased with the session. I'll see you guys next time on Loki's Lair. Merry Christmas. Peace.